5:30 on my clock, so I will gavel in tonight's actual regular meeting, monthly meeting of the Fargo Park Board of Commissioners at 5:30 in the boardroom and online at Teams. Moving on to the agenda, approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. Item number 1.
So moved.
A motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, it passes. Item number 2, approval of the April bills. We have a motion for discussion.
Move to approve as presented.
We have a motion to approve. Any further discussion? Or do we have a second? We need a second first.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Who's here instead of Jeff?
Braden.
Braden, can you pull the board, please?
Yeah, can I get everyone's names just actually here and on the video?
Okay, I'll pull the board first, and you can write them down. Commissioner Dawson.
Aye.
Commissioner Papacek.
Aye.
Commissioner Deutsch.
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs.
Aye.
And I'm the last one, Braden, so I'll say yes. Motion passes 5-0. The bills are going to get paid. Approve the order of the agenda, item number 3.
So moved.
I'd like to make one change request.
Okay,
I'd like to request that we table item number 8, discussion on Fargo Moorhead Community Theater, FMCT, proposal to expand their facility. I think there's just, after speaking with our legal counsel on Friday, there's just a lot of questions. We need to do a little more homework and research, and also help get some of that research and educate the commissioners on, the full background of from 1910 all the way up through 84 and 94. So I would just assume we table it and do a little more homework on that.
any discussion on that?
Sounds fine.
Okay, so how do we have a motion to amend the agenda by tabling item 8 and then approve the rest of the agenda as listed? Is that what we need to do?
No, I think you throw it to Dave first. He makes any updates, and then we make those updates, and then we approve as presented, because
Okay.
it's presented as however it's actually ultimately presented.
Okay, so we had a motion. Vicky motioned the approval. So we need a second.
And I would approve it as represented. I would second as represented.
Okay. One thing I'd ask David is on the homework part of it. I'd like to get more information when they come back on their thoughts about parking and in increased parking, how they're going to accommodate potential increased parking needs. That could be part of the homework.
10-4.
Dave, is your plan to bring this up at the next facilities meeting with just better more background information for us?
Yeah, we'll get all that information out to you. We just received kind of the information regarding, the 1910 dedication to the city and then the city's dedication to the park district. So we just want to make sure all the commissioners have that information prior to, any discussion at the May Facilities Committee meeting, and then ultimately a decision maybe in June. And also we did a walkthrough of the park and And we're looking at impacts to, you know, the hillside and trees. And we also like to present that too.
So Dave, in addition to the railroad, any other questions such as what Jerry brought up with parking or whatever, we should get to you so that when you bring back all the other information, we can deal with it all at once. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Have we identified the legal aspects of any of this yet, or is that still something we're looking into?
I think that's why we're tabling it.
Yep. That's exactly it.
We've spent a lot of money on legal already, so that's why I was just curious, but, okay.
I guess all I would ask is get the information to out as soon as possible so we can review it and we have time to look at it before the next meeting.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think, from my understanding and talking with Dave previously, most of the legal work has been done, but there was just the railroad question that came up. That was part of it, so.
So I would say we just did number 8 right now. So, which was
We got a
discussing.
motion and a second to approve the amended agenda, which was tabling 8. And I think we just piled on a little bit with some further clarification on what we're looking for on tabling that one.
Right.
So we have a motion. Any other discussion on the approval of the order of the agenda? All in favor, say aye.
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 There's 4 ayes. I approve. The agenda passes. Anybody in the audience there, Dave? Anybody online that we know of that we need to recognize?
There's nobody here at the depot, so I don't know if there's anybody online. Carolyn?
No, not that I have.
Okay. I don't see anything either, so, all right. Director's report, number 5.
Most of my information is going to come up with the COVID update. I guess I could state that I did send these out to the commissioners just a while ago, as we did receive Fargo Youth Baseball's 5-year capital plan. So you can review that. We're in the process of reviewing it by staff, and you know, we'll have our recommendations regarding all their proposed items. So that's the only thing I have on the director's report.
Any non-COVID related questions for Dave? All right, item number 6, Foundation Director's Report. Mr. Brian Eric.
Sure, Mr. Chair, members of the board. The foundation board hasn't actually met for the last 2 months. But there is a staff meeting tomorrow to kind of see where we're at with the sports complex and kind of see what our next steps are during this COVID era. And I think after that meeting, we'll go ahead with the foundation board meeting that's coming up on Monday. So for now, I'd say we're planning on holding that meeting on Monday. I'll have a conversation with Rock Messerschmidt, the president of that board, to make sure that he's prepared to go ahead. But that's where I think we're at with the foundation. As far as Valley Senior Services goes, just a little bit of an update on what has been going on with us. I think you're all aware that we have not been doing meals at our sites. We've been doing takeout meals, but not on-site meals for the last almost 2 months now. And that's been going fairly well. Our count overall is up about 15%. That includes meals at our centers and Meals on Wheels. As we've talked about, our volunteers dropped right in the middle of March, but we have picked up over 100 volunteers. So our Meals on Wheels delivery has been going very well. We're practicing social distancing and making sure that volunteers are doing safe practices, washing hands and using masks and leaving meals on a bench or chair outside a person's door, knocking, making sure they're okay. But that's going fairly well. We've received a couple of fairly good sized grants, one from the FM Area Foundation for $15,000 and one from Meals on Wheels America for $20,000. In addition, we have been notified by the state that we're going to receive some additional funds through the Family First Coronavirus Response Act and the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, the CARES Act. And those dollars will provide some supplementary funding for the additional Meals on Wheels we're doing and some funding for some of the additional costs that we have. They'll also provide funds to expand our Meals on Wheels program. So if we're able to, we're going to add the number of meals that we provide for people during the week. Maybe take-home meals on Friday, for instance, for the weekend or something like that. In addition, we've been invited by Meals on Wheels America to apply for a second grant. Meals on Wheels America is kind of a national foundation. I've received donations from a number of corporations in the last 2 months. So they've asked us to apply for another grant, again, to help us continue to expand what we're doing. And probably the biggest impact I've noticed from this is the number of older people that are staying home, that aren't quite as comfortable getting out, and that are asking to be put on Meals on Wheels, who in the past might have come to one of our meal sites, or maybe they would have gone to a restaurant in town, but now, you know, restaurants, of course, weren't open for a while, and they're just not comfortable circulating in society. So we're thankful that we're in a position that we can help those people. And I would say it's going fairly well. A little bit more stressful for staff, you know, having to be careful because of the nature of the population that we serve. Other than that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I'd be just curious, Brian, do you see any foundational changes in how Valley Senior Services handles Meals on Wheels based on the COVID? I mean, like in higher ed, for instance, you know, we're talking about how classroom experience is going to be completely different, and we may not go back to the traditional ways. Are you seeing anything there that is trending in that direction? Like instead of having dine in, you're just going to have pickup?
You know, I think eventually we'll get back to allowing people to have their meals at our meal sites, but I'm not sure that as many seniors are going to want to be out in society that much. So my hunch is that more people are going to want to take their meals and go than have in the past. In the past, the federal government, the state, through the Older Americans Act, has really discouraged takeout meals. But because of the long-term nature of this pandemic, I suspect that they're going to soften, you know, that guideline, and they're going to allow people to take meals out a little bit more. So from a long-term standpoint, at least like the short-term, long-term, you know, 3 years or so, 1 to 3 years, I'm guessing there's going to be a downward trend in the number of people that are comfortable having meals in a group setting.
Brian, when you hand out the pickup meals, are they still in their car, or do they get out of their car and walk up?
Both. For those that want, we bring meals out, and at some of our sites, it's almost exclusively that way. Many of our sites are located in housing facilities, so the people that eat there live there.
Sure.
So they come downstairs. Our staff are gloved and have face masks on and are distributing meals, you know, many times in the building where the people live.
Sure. Well, and I would guess as the weather, at least for the ones where people are outside, coming from the outside, you're going to see more of them maybe socializing amongst themselves just with the weather being nicer.
You know, possibly. I sure haven't seen much of that so
Maybe
far.
from afar.
Yeah, so far they have been really spreading. When they come to the center, even they kind of
Skittish.
set out in the room. So
Yeah.
I think they understand the nature of this virus, and they don't want to expose themselves to it.
Well, that's good. If you had it with a different generation, you might see something different where they don't have the fear and they're gathering when maybe they shouldn't. So hopefully we won't have that problem.
Right.
Well, thank you for what you're doing. Do you have enough, so you have enough drivers for the increased 15%? Would that be right?
Yeah, so far we're doing really well with volunteers. You know, there was such an immediate response early on. You know, we got out in the media and we let people know that we had a need, and they came forth in droves. So right now we're doing really well. If we have a need, we'll just put the word out, and hopefully that's what it'll take, you know, to get some more volunteers.
Sounds good. I would guess that some of the people you have now that have never done it before are people who maybe have the ability to because their work situation has changed. I mean, I know that's the case in my household.
I think that's true. We've picked up a few retirees, you know, that maybe this has been something they've thought about before, but just haven't had the impetus to step forward. Now they have.
Sure.
A few people that are delivering every day, you know,
Nice.
that really have taken this on. So hopefully that'll be a long-term trend for us.
Good. Good to hear. Thank you. Good job getting all that grant money too.
Thank you.
That's a game changer.
Any other questions for Brian?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Great job, and tell all your staff that, you know, we're real happy and proud of the work they're doing in this weird time that we live in.
I will. Thank you. I'll spread that word.
All right, Mr. Tyson Lund, the next item, what number is it? 6? I gotta look here. No, it's item 7, presentation, consideration, approval of the 2019 audit. We love auditors, and Brian Stavanger from iDaily is here to present. And
Yeah,
Tyson, you can start. I'll give it to you first, Tyson.
All right, thank you, commissioners. So like you said, Brian Stavanger is with us today. He's going to present the 2019 audit report. So Brian, if you're on, I'll just turn it over to you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to attempt to share my screen, assuming that works. I will get confirmation. How's that look? Everyone can see the executive summary?
Uh-oh.
Yep.
I heard an uh-oh.
And Brian, this is Dave Bleeker. I think, as with our facility committee meeting, it might be delayed here a little bit at the depot. We're still waiting for it to come up, so.
I got it.
It's up for us.
How's the depot?
Carolyn timed it last time, it was about 10 seconds, so.
No, it's 25.
Oh, 25 now? Okay.
Yeah, it's 25.
But you've got it?
That just means you guys are 25 seconds behind us all the time.
We've all heard it here before, so as long as commissioners have it up, we're good. Feel free, Brian.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Tyson. So last week, as was mentioned, went through this in great detail at the budget meeting, and we'll provide a much. This is titled the executive summary, and we will do a summarized version of the executive summary, going through the exact same slides and exact same information, but not diving as deep into it as we did last week. So this is, as a reminder, is for the year ended 12/31/19. So we're 5 months into 2020. This is actually related to 2019. Each slide I'll go through as quick as I can. I'll pause at if not at the end of each slide, at least every other slide or every few slides, just to allow opportunities for interjection of comments or questions. And then when we're done, we'll have a final slide allowing for questions, and we should be good. So here we go. Audit recap. So when we do the audit, we're really coming in and we're following three different audit standards. The general standards, we follow government audit standards, which are an increased layer of standards. And then we also provide a separate audit for the federal funds, which mostly flow through Valley Senior Services. And we follow another set of standards for those. When we're doing our audit, we are obtaining reasonable assurance that the financial statements are accurate. We do not provide absolute assurance, and the distinction is we're not looking at 100% of the transactions. We're looking at just a sampling of those transactions based on the standards we have to follow. We provide you reasonable assurance. Our procedures, really as mentioned, are a test basis. We look at evidence that support the amounts and disclosures in the financial statements of the park district, lots of discussions with management, and then we assess the quality of certain accounting principles and significant estimates. There are 2 significant estimates that are contained every year in your financial statements. Both really involve third-party actuaries and other entities, so not a lot of estimating done by management, but more in relying on those third parties through the other post-employment benefits and the net pension liability. The timeline of the audit, we really get started in the fall, in October, and do planning and pre-work through February. We normally come on site to the depot to perform our work. Had to switch that up this year, of course, and that ended up going actually very well. Definitely a change, but we made it work. We were dedicated the last week of March to complete the normal on-site work, but that's when we spent the majority of our time working with management and staff to get our audit procedures completed. We continue really through April, just wrapping everything up, and then report to you in May. We finalize the audit officially on May 7th, the day following that budget meeting. What were the audit results? We'll give this to you in a few different slides. When you hire us, Eide Bailly, to do the audit of the financial statements, you really are asking us to complete work and give you our opinion on the financial statements. You received a clean, unmodified opinion, which is really what you want when you receive this type of audit. Really means the financial statements are prepared using all the right rules, all the numbers we believe are materially accurate and fairly presented. As a part of the audit, we also report any findings that we have throughout the audit process. The findings this year were really the same as last year, and it's more of a transparency of our involvement in the audit process and the financial statement process as auditors. We do prepare the financial statements based on information provided by management, and also proposed a few journal entries. I would say this is very, very common in not only governmental entities, but entities across the region, the country. When the auditor is involved in the preparation of the financial statements, again, just wanted to make sure we report that to you. In relation to the federal audit, which is focusing on mainly, again, those Valley Senior Services funds, the nutrition services funds, we do a separate audit on that as required by the federal government, really looking at internal control, making sure that internal control is adequate to spend those funds based on the rules that they are allowed to be spent on. And then the compliance, really just making sure they are indeed being spent on items they need to be spent on. Received an unmodified opinion there, that clean opinion, no findings to report either on the internal controls or the compliance area. One more slide before we get into some numbers. We also issue a separate management letter. This is a 3 to 4 page document, really just outlining management's responsibilities, auditors' responsibilities, and then any other items that we come across through the audit that don't rise to the level of a finding. We do have what we call past adjustments. These are adjustments that we noted that we did not make or did not propose to management, but they were within the threshold that we want to make sure we report them here so that you're aware of what's out there. Just some accounts receivable items in Courts Plus, items with a credit balance that should be reclassified, but again, not significant enough to actually have to do that. And then looking at any accounts receivable greater than 90 days, which at 12/31/19 was just under $7,000, and we would recommend an allowance for doubtful accounts for those amounts. None needed because it's not a significant dollar amount, but definitely something to monitor going forward during this pandemic and whatever long-term effects it has on potential collectability of receivables at Courts Plus. I'm really going to focus in more on that when we work on the 2020 audit. The last item that was unrecorded was an additional OPEB liability. We had this last year as well when we actually recommend that the Park District not make this entry. All it does is add another number on the balance sheet, which everyone looks at and goes, what is that? And honestly adds about 4 pages to the report. It is not significant enough that you have to record it, but it is at a dollar amount where we need to report it in the management letter and at least make you aware that we are not reporting that in the full financial statement. So I'll pause there before we get into the actual numbers and just see if there's any questions on the audit process, the audit results, either from the board or added commentary from management.
Is there any comments or questions from the commissioners? You can proceed, Brian.
All right, thank you. Cash and investments. I've heard a lot in the last, I would say 6 weeks. Cash is king. When there are fluctuations in the economy, either through a pandemic, unfortunately, or items such as 10 to 12 years ago with the recession, that's when cash is king, and it's important to have cash on hand to help entities, governments get through those types of trying times. So we always like to point out the cash and investment balances for the Park District. This is a 10-year look at the cash and investment balances broken into 3 different categories. The first category, capital projects. So you have really a separate fund where you allocate dollars for future capital projects. That's the yellow on this slide. Then the debt service fund is dedicated to pay most of the long-term debt that the Park District has. And then the final one, the blue one, is the general fund. That's really your general operating fund, your main operating fund. The combination of those at the end of 2019 sitting at just about $19 million in cash investments. For the most part in the last 6 years, very consistent in that cash and investment balance. Those are some significant numbers. We always like to turn that into a ratio to really help you understand what those dollar amounts mean. So here is a calculation of the liquidity ratio. So this is really looking at how much cash do you have on hand compared to your current liabilities, such as accounts payable, payroll, and then any long-term debt, principal, and interest that is due in the next year. What is the cash on hand compared to those liabilities? This graph, the ratio, really 1.00 would indicate that for every dollar you owe or have in liabilities, you have $1 in cash on hand at the end of the year. You can see on this graph, you've been above 2 for all 10 years, and really for 8 of the 10 years, you've been above 3, and at sometimes at 5. But at the end of 2019, just under 4.00 liquidity ratio, meaning you have about $4 cash on hand for every dollar that you owe in a liability, a good strong liquidity ratio. Cash is king, and this is why it's important to have cash on hand. The general fund. So we're going to look at some of those funds individually. The general fund, the main operating fund of the Park District. Looking at the revenues that are coming in on an annual basis in that general fund, broken into 4 main categories: taxes, charges for services, intergovernmental, and then all other miscellaneous items. You can see the streams and the allocations of where that money is coming from does not fluctuate a lot from year to year. Taxes are your number 1 revenue source, followed by the charges for services, intergovernmental, and then miscellaneous. We would expect a lot of consistency on these revenues, and that really is the case. Sticking with that general fund, what are the expenditures and any transfers out of the general fund on an annual basis? Similar to the revenue graph, consistent here, most of your current operating expenses, your wages, your salaries, your benefits, your supplies, program expenses, repairs and maintenance, those are all considered current, that blue indicator. Any capital outlay, there is a capital projects fund where you account for your larger capital projects and capital outlay, but some of the smaller items are spent out of the general fund. So you can see there roughly 1 million to 1.5 million on an annual basis on the smaller capital outlay coming out of the general fund. There is some limited debt service that is paid out of here. Again, there's another debt service fund that pays the majority of it. A little bit of it is paid out of the general fund, and then transfers out to other funds. The most significant transfers are annual transfers to the capital projects fund to help keep that cash balance at a strong position to be able to fund future significant capital projects, but also some smaller transfers specifically to Courts Plus to help with the operations there, which we'll look at that in a few pages. I'll pause briefly. Revenues and expenses in the general fund, if there's any questions or added comments from management. Okay, hearing none. Oh, sorry. Any questions?
I was just asking the same thing. It doesn't sound like we have any questions.
All right. The last thing in the general fund is taking a look at the fund balance, really the reserves that exist. The fund balance is an accounting term. It is very, very closely related to the cash balance, but it's not exact. There are accounting items that flow through the general fund that don't necessarily hit cash, non-cash items. So fund balance doesn't always match up with cash exactly, but usually very, very close. But having a positive fund balance is very important. There's three main reasons. Bond rating agencies love a fund balance. The stronger fund balance, the stronger reserves, the more favorable rating you're going to get. It does produce investment income and also a source of working capital to meet cash flow needs. And number three, which is really highlighted, unfortunately, in the times we're living through right now, but any unexpected expenditures or potential revenue shortfalls, a positive fund balance can provide that cushion to get through. The fund balance, much like all governmental accounting, is not just simply a fund balance. It's broken into categories. There's three categories that the Park District utilizes: non-spendable, which is really any interfund loans or long-term receivables, prepaid items, inventory, kind of uncontrollable, but you do have some non-spendable fund balance. You also have some assigned fund balance, which is where you've internally earmarked certain dollars for specific projects or items, and then everything else is in the unassigned category. Just wanted to point those out because we are going to show this next slide, those different fund balance categories. So in total, at the end of 2019, in the general fund, over $5 million in fund balance. You can see how that is broken out. Non-spendable, $844,000. You've assigned or earmarked about $2.7 million of that fund balance for specific items, such as pension, forestry, insurance, those types of items. Whatever remains is considered unassigned, $1.6 million. You can see that fund balance has steadily grown in the past 10 years. And we'll look at that in a ratio format because the raw numbers can be overwhelming and significant. So the next slide takes a look at the fund balance and says, what is it as a percentage of your expenditures? So really, what do you have in reserves compared to your budget? You can look at this graph, and really beginning in 2014 and continuing through 2019, you've been able to maintain a fund balance representing roughly 1/4 of your general fund operating budget. That's a good, strong fund balance. The recommendation that's out there at the national level is really no less than 5 to 15. That 15% is probably the floor that you'd want to be at if you were looking at what are others recommending. You've really settled in nicely at that 20 to 25% fund balance. Good, strong fund balance in that general fund. I'm going to keep moving along. We've got a few more slides looking at all the other funds. Don't want to miss out on those. The debt service fund, the fund that is taking care of collecting taxes and special assessments in order to pay the debt service payments, that fund balance 2010 to 2018, fairly consistent, jumped up a little bit in 2019, over $5 million at the end of 2019. That'll fluctuate depending on some timing of things, but a good strong ending fund balance in that debt service fund. Capital Projects Fund, which is where those significant capital projects are spent out of. You can see really a focus in the first 4 to 5 years of this graph of growing that capital projects fund. And then that's leveled off, really in the last 3 years between $8 and $10 million of ending fund balance in the capital projects. At the end of 2019, just about 9.2 million in that capital projects fund. All right, we'll get to Quartz Plus. Quartz Plus is taking a look at really the operations for the last 10 years. The green line is a representation of the operating expenses, the blue line a representation of the revenues, and then that very bottom line, the operating loss on an annual basis. This only reflects the operations. There is an annual budgeted transfer and an actual transfer that comes in from the general fund of about $200,000 that really does supplement the operations of Quartz Plus and ensure that overall there's positive operating results. But very, very consistent on Quartz Plus.
Brian, why do we call it an enterprise fund if it's subsidized?
Why do you call it an enterprise fund if it's subsidized?
By the general fund. Isn't everything we do subsidized? So why is Quartz Plus looked at differently? I just had this question for a number of years. And I don't know if I've ever asked it before or understood it.
It really is a management decision on how to present each fund. Quartz Plus at whatever point in time it was decided to separate it out and report it as an enterprise fund, which would show the operating results of it all alone, all by itself. There is flexibility. It's not required that you do it. For whatever reason, the decision was made many years ago to do that. The fact that there is some annual supplement coming in from the general fund, it is allowed to continue to be presented this way, but it really is a management decision on doing that. No right or wrong answer.
Thank you.
I have a question before we get into Valley Senior Services. This might be more for Tyson, but back to the debt service fund. Where do you see that going moving forward? I see we added about another $1 million in that account. Do you see anything new coming on or going off, and maybe trend-wise where that'll go in the next few years?
So one of the reasons for that increase in the last year was special assessments. So what Jim used to do is he would go and he'd pay some additional principal each year just to kind of save on financing costs in the long run. We didn't do that last year, so that's kind of why that increase. And I'm planning on taking that, making an additional payment this next year to kind of keep that trend going and pay off the interest ahead of time, just to keep financing costs lower. But then the stuff we have coming off, I think 2023 we have, I believe it's the pool coming off. 2024 we have some other stuff coming off, but it's really, I think 2026 is the big one when the North Complex comes off. But that's kind of the reason for that jump.
Because our bigger ones right now is the North Complex, the Davies Pool, and Osgood, right? I think those are the three main ones that we're carrying.
Yeah, I can't remember what 23 and 24 Osgood and Davies Pool. I can't remember which one is which, but
yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Those are the more current ones.
Valley Senior Services, this is looking at the revenue stream for Valley Senior Services for the last 10 years. Really has been the case for most of these slides, very consistent. Intergovernmental, federal, and state revenues fund the majority of Valley Senior Services. Also some charges for services, and then any other miscellaneous such as interest and donations. On the expenditure side for Valley Senior Services, wages make up the, I guess the most expenses that are expended out of the Valley Senior Services. Other operating costs such as meal expenses, supplies, travel, repairs and maintenance would be that green section, and then any capital outlay would be captured in that very top line of each year. 2019 jumped a little bit with the purchase of some new vehicles to help with delivery. And then the very last slide before kind of wrap things up would be debt service coverage. So if there was one slide that I could pick to look at, it would probably be debt service coverage. If there were a couple slides, it would be, you know, your reserves, your cash balances, your fund balance ratios, but your debt service coverage is very important. It's an indication from, on an annual basis, what type of cash flow are you generating to repay your long-term debt, principal and interest. It is going to fluctuate from year to year. Things happen. It's not always going to be at a high level. It potentially can drop down to a lower level. We don't like to look at any one year individually because really there should be some trends that are identified through this coverage. It is calculated on an annual basis. So in years where potentially you have a lower debt service coverage, all that means is for that year, the cash being generated was not as strong as other years, and you maybe had to utilize reserves for that year to help you pay the debt service. If you were consistently lower, that's where there would be cause of concern of are the revenues not meeting the requirements to repay the debt? Are there certain expenses that potentially could be eliminated to ensure that you can repay your long-term debt? With so much long-term debt, you really want to make sure you have the ability to repay it. There is a line on that graph that is on the 1.00 line. That really is the minimum you want to be at. 1.00 would indicate that for every dollar of cash flow available to pay debt, there is a dollar of debt that you need to pay. So that 1.0 is really the minimum you want to be at in the long run. You can see there are certain years that dips down, and then in other years, and in most years, it's very, very strong. I would say especially in the last 5 years, that ratio has been between 1.25 and 2, a good strong debt service coverage. This is broken out between the governmental funds, which is really your debt service fund, and then the debt service that's paid out of the general fund, and then the green is Courts Plus. So overall, these very much mirror each other except for a couple of years, but especially in the last 4 years, some good strong debt service coverage. What I'll do now is I will pause again for any other questions that any of the commissioners may have, as well as if there's any added commentary from commissioners or management.
Anyone with questions?
No questions, Chair. Just thank you, Brian. Nice job.
Thank you.
Is this the end of the line, Brian? Do you have anything else?
There it is. There's the last slide. A big thank you. Last year being 2018 was a big year of transition. We knew that going in. We finalized in July, met with you in July or August. This past audit, 2019, really got back on the timeline that was previous to 2018 and the year of transition. Even with the pandemic and working remotely, we were able to get you back on track, finalizing in early May and then reporting to you now. So very, very happy with those results to get back on that normal timeline. Thanks to Tyson, Chris, everyone else involved who stepped up and helped us through this unique year of auditing. Hopefully we can get back to normal, but if not, we know we can deal with anything that's thrown at us. So a big thank you to everyone involved.
Yeah, I'll just add a comment that when we got to this topic and introduced you, I made a comment that some people might consider snarky about we love auditors or whatever, but I actually do think auditing is a critical component, particularly for government agencies, and it's kind of like, you know, you can be the best writer in the world, but the best writers in the world have auditors to make sure that, or editors to make sure that you know, that somebody's looking over their shoulder, keeping things straight and catching things that we just don't catch. So I do really believe firmly in auditing as an important component in private enterprise too, but particularly in a government agency. So thanks for all the work you've done.
Thank you. That's all I have.
All right,
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Commissioners,
Thanks, Brian.
we need to move to approve the audit as presented unless we have conversation or discussion.
I move we approve the audit as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other conversation? Right, Braden, pull the board.
Commissioner Dawson,
Aye.
Commissioner Papachek,
Aye.
Commissioner Deutsch,
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs,
Aye.
and Commissioner Rosted.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Thanks again, Brian.
Yep, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Brian.
Moving on to item number 9, COVID update. We've got 2 parts. Do you want to address them individually or just roll them together?
No, I'm basically, President Rosted, I was just going to give kind of a general briefing. And the briefing today basically just entails what we've done since we began opening up Park District facilities. I did send out prior to the board meeting a piece that our marketing group did along with our directors, and it's kind of a 2-page cheat sheet, and it's kind of an opening matrix, and it's up to date as of today. So it's somewhere you can go and see what's open. We also have one for Courts Plus. So if you have a chance, you can review that. That gets updated daily as guidelines change, and that's more internal for staff and commissioners. Just the update I was going to read through, and I'll end up sending this out. I'll probably send it out to the commissioners tomorrow, but it basically follows some of the same timeline, or follows the same timelines as what that opening matrix does. And just kind of giving you an update of where we've been since the beginning of this. At the beginning, our parks and our trails remained open to the public with park signage and proper distancing, social distancing, and then just smart use, common sense. Our Lindenwood campground opened on Friday, May 1st, and all these have posted signage, and I think everybody's is very well aware of kind of probably the 6 main points on the COVID related issues. So I won't touch on those again, but the Lindenwood campground opened Friday, May 1st. Lindenwood bike rentals opened Friday, May 1st along with the campground. Depot, we did open last week on Monday. Golf courses, all of our golf courses are currently open now. The latest being Edgewood, and that was just due to some drying required after the minor flood we had up there. Courts Plus opened this week, May 11th. The walking track most recently and the weight room at the sports arena opened today. Playgrounds we will touch on our next item. Right now coming up, we've got softball, baseball, and soccer practices. While teams and agencies can go out there and use the parks, it's kind of pickup practices. We will be starting to schedule block times for these different groups to practice at our facilities on May 15th. And while we haven't approved any games being played at our facilities, we're still waiting for the State Health Department and the Governor's Office to kind of give the okay for that. We just feel practices are all right for teams to use because you have a lot more control. You can keep kids separated, but it also allows them to get out and practice the sports they love. So I think it's important that we get these things opened up and allow some opportunities for kids and families with, of course, smart guidelines. So we'll wait to hear from the state about games, and basically on those same lines, we're going to follow that with our Fargo Park District programs and baseball programs that, depending on the program, will depend on the lead time, but typically we'll look a week to 2 weeks out of when our programs can start. On the 18th, staff will decide on programs for the first 2 weeks in June, and by the end of May for the last 2 weeks of June. We still are working with NDRPA virtual roundtables on guidelines for pools. That is another item that is probably we're gonna get the okay from the state health department on when and if we can. I do feel at some point they will allow pools to be open, and I know there comes a time we've got to look at budget issues, and then also, if it gets to a certain time, is it worth opening pools? But hopefully we can, with everything being closed down, I think this is still a good opportunity for us to offer something to the public, especially when if it gets hot this summer. And then phase 2, or to be announced opening dates. Remaining indoor facilities will not open until phase 2 at the earliest, in accordance with the governor's mandate related to rec centers, large venues. And these include Metro Rec, Southwest Youth Hockey, Coliseum, and RDJ. And then we're also waiting, and hopefully word comes this week from the governor's office. We've kept our reservable large shelters closed. We've had some good discussions internally of, do we open those? Do we not open them? And until we hear a little bit further from the state regarding, group sizes, right now it's limited to 10. If they do it, increase that to 50 or 100. We've heard rumors that they'll be putting out some of those guidelines this week, and hopefully we'll be able to address the large rentable shelters by the end of the week. So that's kind of just a COVID update, and basically relates to timing of openings of our facilities. So if you have any questions, myself or the other directors are available for discussion. And if we don't have any further questions, or we complete those questions, we can discuss item B, playgrounds. So do we have any questions on opening of facilities?
Dave, I got a question on the pools with the overnight temperatures being below freezing the past couple of nights and the highs not getting to 50. Where are we, relatively speaking, to getting started with cleaning and getting the pools filled? And are we still timing perspective about normal, or are we behind, or where are we at with that?
I would probably have to defer to Dave Beats, but I know our guys have been out cleaning pools. We haven't started filling them. We typically try to do that 2 weeks prior, just so we can get the chemicals balanced, and then we need a couple days to get them heated to temp. But I know we are working on it. We're still waiting for a go ahead from the governor's office about when we could possibly open those. So I don't know, Dave, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't, Dave. You're right on the money. Commissioners, we're right on schedule. We're preparing to open like we normally would the first part of June. The thing we're going to hold back on are the big expensive things like filling the water, like Dave talked about, adding the chemicals, because once there's a big expense with the water. With the weather conditions, like Commissioner Rosted talked about, there is an expense with heating the water, and then an expense with the chlorine and chemicals that go into the water. So those are the things we're holding off on until we know for certain. Other than that, we're going ahead with our work and making sure that we're ready once we can get the green light to go ahead.
And maybe Kevin, I don't know if Kevin has an update. I know he's been working with Dave Plunt on staffing. Do we need 2 weeks? Do we need 3 weeks? What do we need for a lead time if we're make the decision to open their pools?
Well, we do have staffing that are applying. We just haven't pulled the trigger as far as interviews and all that. Dave had a conference call, I believe it's tomorrow, with all the managers. So to talk through some of the scenarios as far as locker room facilities, how do we get people from point A to point B? Once the governor comes out with those guidelines, then we can work on, more detailed policies and procedures as we work through that. So right now, we'll wait for Friday to kind of lay things out after the governor's made his policy recommendations. So the only issue that we have, and I think I brought this up at the budget meeting, is with the schools not allowing us in their facilities, we have about 15 guards that need to be certified. So we're looking at whether it's the colleges or the YMCA to see if we can actually get into those pools. The Red Cross has said they suspended those certifications because of the close contact that they need to be with these individual lifeguards. So still working through that process.
Well, I think Commissioner Dawson invited him down to her lake place last week.
Well, one of my boys is actually one of those kids who's waiting to figure out how he can get his lifeguard certification. So maybe I have to be the dummy that he rescues from the water. I'm not sure. So since we're in the same household, he can be in close contact with me.
Well,
Dave,
talk
talk a little bit about Dave, talk a little bit about baseball. We're getting some inquiries, and just tell us where we are as a park district. I mean, we control the fields. We own them. We're the landlord. We have a user group that's basically leasing from us. We're starting practices on the 15th. Are we comfortable with where we're going with that? And you reached out to RUPOC at Fargo Public Schools because we have, some fields that are joint use. So just tell commissioners where we are so as we get questions, we're armed with the right answers.
Yeah, Kevin can follow up here if I miss anything. Yeah, we've worked with Alex and Fargo Youth Baseball. I think he's done a good job of kind of bringing everybody together. He's initially worked with Minnesota Baseball and along with North Dakota Babe Ruth Baseball Association to put a set of protocols and operating guidelines similar to what we did with golf and then ultimately Course Plus. But I think they've done their homework. They've put a very thorough list of protocols together. I did talk with one parent here prior to the board meeting, and I let them know that, we are going to open up our facilities, providing these sports groups, user groups provide us with their operation protocols, and we feel that they're following, state and local health guidelines and CDC guidelines. As I mentioned before, practices are a lot easier to control than games, full contact games. And I don't know, even if it's not football, you're still, tagging people out in baseball or bumping people out in soccer. But right now we're allowing our facilities to be used for practices, providing they have the proper protocols in place. I think Alex has done a nice job getting the American Legion together, North Dakota Babe Ruth Baseball, West Fargo Baseball, and Fargo Baseball, and along with our programs, and has put a very thorough list of protocols together. So I don't, Kevin, if you got anything to add.
Yeah, commissioners, we've met with, or had phone calls with USA Softball. Obviously, as Dave said, youth baseball. Post 2, we've met with Fargo Youth Hockey. We've talked to West Fargo. So we're all on the same page as far as these practice times. Now, they might open their facilities a little bit later. Maybe in West Fargo, I have not heard that as of yet. But as far as our practice protocols, we gave them a minimum standard that we wanted them to adhere to, and then they submitted, as Dave said, prior to us releasing any of those block times, they were to submit a more detailed plan of how they're going to handle, their practices. Once we get into phase 2, unless that changes by the governor on Friday, phase 2 has been kind of set aside as time to start games and tournaments. So those protocols will be different than the practice protocols. We just need to look to open these facilities up on Friday.
And just an FYI, we did have one group, and I won't mention names, but they just feel that as long as they keep their numbers under 10, that they're following the governor's guidelines and are proposing to play games. And we've told them that I have yet to hear anything about allowing games to be played, whether it's 10 people or fewer. So just kind of an FYI on that. We're still waiting to hear from the governor's office on games.
Can you send us the information you've gotten from our different user groups, whether it's the hockey people or the soccer people or what? It could be adult league. It doesn't matter to me. Just what their plan is. So if anybody asks us, we have some idea of what they've put together specifically for their organization.
Yeah, we keep a file of those and we'll compile them and we can definitely send those out. and if anybody has any questions at any time, feel free to refer them to myself, and we can get them to another director too. So just an FYI, yeah, we don't need, if you're not comfortable, we can always answer those questions. So, but we'll get those out to you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
I know West Fargo's travel baseball tryouts, which have been pushed off for months, or at least a month, are Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So they're on pace like we are to start up this weekend too. So.
Any further questions? All right, hearing none, we can move on to item B, which last month we decided we were going to close our playgrounds. And I just wanted to put it on the board agenda to discuss again. I don't know if anybody's had a chance. I did do a quick survey yesterday of the 9 or 10 largest park districts in North Dakota, and just kind of give you an update of where they stand right now. I did send that out to you, so I don't know if you've had a chance to review that or not. The park districts that did not close down their playgrounds were Dickinson, Mandan, Bismarck, Minot, and Devils Lake. Park districts that closed their playgrounds but opened up last Friday was Grand Forks. Park districts that closed their playgrounds and will open this week are Williston and Valley City. And then right now, as of this week, are currently closed is Fargo and West Fargo. And we have a board meeting tonight. West Fargo has a commission meeting tomorrow night. So that kind of gives you a background of what everybody's been doing this last month. And then regarding sanitization of the playgrounds, Grand Forks, Devils Lake, and Minot have done it or has sanitized their playgrounds in a limited effort, I guess you would say. Weekly, every other week.
How are they doing that?
I believe just with typical weed sprayers, 2-gallon weed sprayers with sanitizer, similar to what we do with our golf carts.
Sure.
But when I even asked Bill Palmasino in Grand Forks of how that was going, and he said, they try to get to them, but you can't get to them every day or every other week maybe.
So a lot of playgrounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
So the ones that have reopened, what have they put up some new signage that says they're open but still providing some caution or guidance, or do they just take the signs down and call it good?
I guess I didn't ask that specific question. Ever since the beginning of the whole COVID incident, a lot of places were, putting up that signage that we initially put up, that was put out by NRPA and with some additional bullet points. And I'm guessing it's just reinforcing proper distancing, don't go out if you're sick, those kind of things. So I'm guessing every district has a certain degree of signage they put in their parks and playgrounds.
There seems to be confusion when it comes to using the terms parks versus playgrounds. It says that Dickinson never closed their playground, but I'm reading an article right here that says city parks remain open to the public. However, Dickinson Parks and Rec Department has closed all playgrounds and park workout stations amid coronavirus social distancing guidelines. And it's a whole article about how their playground is closed in Dickinson. So I don't know if they've reopened since, but the information in that email told us that they never closed in the first place. So I don't, and the reason I'm not trying to split hairs, but it became a big thing when people started reaching out to me going, how dare you close the playgrounds or the parks? And we didn't close the parks. We never closed the parks. In fact, we're encouraging people to use the parks, but the playground was a different story. So I don't know. I don't know what the right thing to do is.
What is the plan for the school district? Do they have anything in the works for reopening their playgrounds, keeping in mind that many of them overlap and people don't necessarily know what a school playground is versus a park playground?
Yeah, and I did not reach out to the school districts throughout the state or Fargo. I just reached out to the park districts. I know in Grand Forks, I would hasten to say that their schools probably would be open, because I know Bill, their executive director, sits on their school board, and that was one reason the park district followed suit with the school district, was the school district closed their playground, so the park district did, and I would assume in turn followed suit for both of them, but I do not know on Fargo.
I would think we'd want to be in line with the schools, whether we initiated it or not, or they initiated, but I think that creates a whole nother level of confusion if you're having, well, this is a school playground and this is a park playground. It'd be nice to be on the same page as the rest of this, the rest of the city.
What are you proposing at this point, Dave?
Well, I mean, I guess if you're asking, what would I do, I would open up our playgrounds with our typical signage that we've had since the inception of the COVID incident, and we can follow up with the school district. In talking with Bismarck and Minot, and there was no research or articles that said playgrounds contributed to anything, or they could trace back to playgrounds. So I think while the playgrounds are open, it's the same as using a fitness facility or a restaurant. You have to be smart, you have to use common sense, you have to be accountable. You can still go out there, and if you have sanitary wipes or disinfectant that you want to wipe down a swing, slides are kind of tough, but me personally, I think, it'd be nice to get some things opened up so kids have things to do. And I have had some questions of, how come kids can start playing baseball or soccer, but yet we can't use our playgrounds?
Mm-hmm. Well, and using the comparison of athletic equipment at Courts Plus and a playground, they're not really parallel, because we are cleaning the equipment in between people, and a playground is so much harder to manage and clean, and even just, we're not cleaning them between each family or kid that uses them. So these are pretty big units, and while we can't necessarily say, yeah, this is what's causing it or contributing to certain positives, we just don't know is part of the problem.
So last week on May 5th, Dickinson released a statement and said, Dickinson Park and Rec will be removing all caution tape on our playgrounds. Please use your discretion when using them, as they are not cleaned on a regular basis. If you are on a playground or using our outdoor fitness equipment, please practice social distancing and use your own hand sanitizer when you are done. You may also use your own antibacterial wipes on any of our surfaces prior to playing. So that's how they chose to handle it.
Do they have any signs in their parks, or do we know that give these recommendations to people who are using the equipment? Because I think we need to continue to remind everybody, because I think sometimes we're letting our guard down and we're opening things up and people are thinking it's all okay, and it's not all okay. We are still under warning to take care of yourself, and there are still things being shared that we don't want to catch. And so
I was very, very impressed with what our staff put out at our parks in or near the playground area. And yeah, it gives you the whole physical distancing. It shows people at a park and distancing, and it's got bright colors, and it's happy and it's positive, yet it's still communicating the right information.
And if we're gonna keep all of that out, that's great. I've had a lot of good comments from people that appreciate the information that's coming out of our park district for many different areas. So I appreciate that.
And we would continue with our signage, and we just, we had all those signs at our playgrounds, and then we replaced them with the closed signs, so we would just reverse that.
Okay.
So Joe, does it say anything in what you read that they did put signage up, or they were going to put signage up, or is that just a press release?
Well, no, but it's on their website, and right next to the press release or whatever, there are two signs from that NRPA created that say tips for physical distancing in parks, and it says do not use playgrounds or other frequently touched surfaces, but I don't know what
Sure.
it says. know to stay 6 feet away. I mean, again, I'm not saying I'm opposed to reopening them, but it would be a real easy answer to say, you know, what the difference is, and that is the same explanation I gave to other people is when you're playing soccer or baseball, there are minor interactions where two people go to kick a ball and they bump into each other and they separate and go their separate ways. But on a playground, adults generally are not moving around on the playground with their kids, and so their kids are out there with other kids in a very confined playground area, which requires people to go around each other, over each other, by each other, and grabbing at metal pieces that are constantly needing to be grabbed at and whatever, in order to actually use the equipment properly. None of those things are the same when it comes to playing soccer or playing baseball. I understand that the baseball is, you know, is a contact piece, but according to the guidelines that I read, that they're going to try to be cleaning the baseball between innings or switching out baseballs and cleaning the other ball that they switched out.
And of course, the baseball rolls through the grass and the dirt and hits the glove before it ever hits your hand, typically anyway.
Right.
So you're limiting it there. And it, you know, the bigger piece for the playground to me is you just can't clean all that surface. And of course, a kid goes from climbing across the monkey bars to sticking his hand somewhere on his face, maybe even into his face, whether it's his mouth or some other area. And so that's, you know, I liked what you read there, Joe, about the recommendations and what they suggest that people do with the hand sanitizer and wiping. And I think something like that, in addition to the NRPA sign, might be something we should put together. And I know it's a lot of work, and I get that people will choose or not choose to read it, but I like at least giving people some kind of guidance, and maybe it's something that we put on our Facebook a few times a week, on our website, I don't know. But I think we need to give people some kind of guidance that we don't just say, playgrounds are open, and then they just think it's all safe. Because as Stacy said, nothing's changed with this virus. Nothing has changed other than they just think we can manage it now, which is a false sense of security for a lot of people.
Just from a statistical standpoint, I went and looked, and as of today, there are 61 cases of COVID in 0 to 9-year-olds. And the total positive tests, it's almost 1,600. So it's less than 4% of the population that's tested positive been less than 10 years old. So.
But my concern is we don't know if those children are giving it to their parents or whoever else is in their household. That's the concern for me is, you know, they could be I've thought all along they could be the ultimate transmitter and never have any symptoms. So it's just, I'm not saying we shouldn't open them. I'm just saying we have to do some due diligence to provide some information and recommendations to the public.
I'm okay with moving towards opening them, but I don't think there's any urgency. And I don't know if we're thinking we're going to do it this Friday, but maybe we shoot for a goal of next Friday, the Friday of Memorial Day, and that gives you guys 10 days to strategize on protocol and how we're going to reopen them.
I can live with that. And then the other thing is tie in with the public schools so that we do it together so there isn't that confusion.
Yeah, I think
I agree. That's
good.
Important. That's an important component with the schools. We've got to find out what they're doing.
Right, because
I don't know if school would be out about that time too, you know, by Memorial Day weekend, but I'd like to know what they're doing.
Because when we closed them the first time, we were told West Fargo, it was heard that West Fargo had closed already. Well, it was actually West Fargo schools that had closed their playgrounds. We closed on Tuesday night. They had their park board meeting on Wednesday night. They closed the park district playgrounds on Wednesday to get in line with the school. So in other words, what I'm getting at is that there's school playgrounds, there's our playgrounds. They must have some playgrounds that aren't ours, right? Just Fargo schools or not? Or are all their playgrounds ours? Yeah.
No, there's school playgrounds.
Okay. So we need
Well,
to
and
make sure.
actually, I was just gonna say, we probably need to coordinate with the West Fargo schools too, because our parks and cross into West Fargo School District.
They do. A continuity of opening would be a good idea between the districts, because there's a lot of gray area.
Well, and I think if we put together a target date, as Rusty recommended, and let West Fargo and Fargo Public Schools and West Fargo Public Schools and Park District know this is our plan, the West Fargo Park District can act on it tomorrow night as well. So we can't, especially if we delay the opening, we can all line up on the same day, which I think would be really good for the community.
So I'm thinking,
I agree.
since we voted to close the playground as a board, I suspect we have to have a motion and pass something that gives Dave direction for the Park District direction going forward. And kind of what I'm hearing is that, maybe the motion might be something to the effect that, we give, the staff the ability to coordinate playground openings with Fargo Public Schools, West Fargo Public Schools, and West Fargo Park District, and see if they can't figure that out collectively and have an opening date.
I like that idea.
I agree.
It's not saying let's open, it's not a motion to say let's open them tomorrow. It's a motion to say to direct our staff to work with the other three entities to come up with a plan that makes sense.
And we're all consistent, and then we don't have to worry about, some kind of 4 different openings of different playgrounds.
So with that, if for some reason the West Fargo schools or the Fargo schools weren't on board with that date, would we push our date back to coordinate with them?
I think you could. I think if we pick a date that's far enough out, like a week from Friday, I think that gives them all time. And I mean, we can nudge our date if we need to. We don't have to set our date in our motion to in our, movement to reopen it. But I think if you give them a target date far enough out, they're probably like us, waiting for somebody else, wonder what other people are doing. When do we do this? How do we do this? Gives everybody about 10 days.
Yeah, instead of picking a target date, maybe we could just say, ahead of the late Memorial Day weekend. And that gives some wiggle room, whether it's Thursday, Friday, whatever.
Well, yeah, I just think that our staff should work with them to say, I mean, the whole rest of the state is open, except for us now at this point, is my understanding. So I would think that everybody would want to work together to figure out a good timeline that works for all 4 of us.
Well, and keep in mind, we're the part of the state that is having the most problems still. So, I mean, obviously we gotta look at what's going on in our community. But I would almost look at it the reverse, that we won't open earlier than, May 21st or something like that, so that you can always push it back later if you want, but you aren't stuck with, gosh, we got to get it open before Memorial Day. If something comes up or everybody else says, well, we were actually looking at June 1st or after the last day of school, which is 28th or something like that.
That makes good sense. I like that.
And that gives staff and everybody else 10 days to figure out what you guys want to do.
All right.
Are we ready?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
So I'm just, for some reason, if they just said they're not ready to open May 21st, or they're not thinking till possibly July 1st, what is our option?
That was a drastic date later. Did they already tell you that, or what?
I don't have any feelings. I haven't talked.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with reopening as long as we provide some guidelines and direction and suggestions and recommendations through a variety of media sources of our own website and Facebook and signage. So at least we're not saying, hey, it's open, and everybody just thinks everything's fine and dandy, and not wait if they're thinking late mean, if they're thinking June 1st, we can probably live with that. If they're thinking July 1st, we might want to forge ahead.
Okay, thank you.
And what do you guys think?
I agree. And, you know, if we handle it like we've been handling Courts Plus and the golf courses, the communication's been great on social media that you guys have put together, and it's very simple to understand. And I completely trust that our staff will come up with the proper way to explain the best way we can to safely play and recreate and still stay safe, healthy. So.
So would a motion be to collaboratively work with Fargo or with West Fargo Schools, Fargo Public Schools, to open no earlier than May 21st, which would be next Thursday, and then that gives us the latitude. If it's later, then we don't have to come back and vote on it again.
Yep.
And that gives us roughly a week to get everything in order.
Yep. Because I could see Fargo Public Schools saying, well, the last day of school is May 28th, so let's not try and get anything open before then, so we don't have to deal with it, and then we'll get past the school year. I could see that happening.
But they're remote already, so it's probably not a lot of pressure on the playgrounds. Because
well, I know, but they also don't want to necessarily make an announcement they're going to open them up. And I don't know if kids would convene on them when they're picking up their school lunch at all these different elementary and other schools. So.
Yeah.
Oh, I would disagree. I would agree with Vicky in the context that they're going to say we're not in school for a reason to keep people from congregating and stuff. And if they open up the playgrounds while school's still in session and kids are congregating on the playground, they're going to have to be out there policing them and sending them away. Otherwise, it completely flies in the face of why they're not there in the first place.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good point.
So I'm okay with us opening, later next week, whether the school does or not. If they have a close enough date that we would like to align with them, then I'm okay with that too.
I agree.
Yeah, so thinking about it a little bit based on what Joe said, they probably would time their opening of the schools with the end of the school year. That does make sense, simply because then they don't have to worry about. Although I think the school board's meeting tonight talking about redistricting, so that maybe they aren't even going to have time to talk about opening the playgrounds.
Well, I would guess that's probably likely that's the last thing on their mind.
And maybe that's more of a staff decision, but again, I don't think they're going to encourage kids to come back to the school before the school year is over, and that's what opening the playground does, is encourages them to come back to school. So
sure.
So what's the last day of school? Does anybody know? Is it 29? 28?
It's a Thursday, right? Isn't that Thursday, May 28th?
Yep, Thursday is May 28th. Well, maybe to simplify things, if in Memorial Day weekend's the 25th, so we'd have to open the 21st. We want to be open for Memorial.
I think we leave it as, no earlier than May 21st, with consideration given to when the other organizations in the community are opening. And then the staff, you guys can wiggle it around as you want.
So is that your motion, or should I make a motion?
Say that again.
Was that a motion, or do you want me to make the motion?
It doesn't matter. I mean, I can make the motion. I move that we look to open the Fargo Park District playgrounds no earlier than May 21st, with consideration given to the Fargo School District, the West Fargo School District, and the West Fargo Parks.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Great, and pull the board.
Commissioner Dawson,
Aye.
Commissioner Popachuk,
Aye.
Commissioner Deutsch,
aye.
Commissioner Griggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Rosted.
Yes, the motion passes. Before we move on to the last item, I just want to reiterate a couple of the comments that were made about some of the work that the staff has done with the reopening and stuff. It's been tremendous. I watched the Courts Plus stop sign video a couple of times because it was so well done. It was just fun to watch, humorous, and yet it got the message across. So great job to the staff for doing that.
Thank you.
Item 10, board to consider for approval a request from Verizon Wireless to locate a cell tower at the Coliseum property. Dave Leaker.
All right, thank you. So hopefully we can put this one to bed tonight. We've been in several back and forth offer counter offers with Verizon Wireless for proposed cell tower on the north side of Fargo, and their location of choice has been somewhere in the area of the Coliseum. So I'll just quickly go through, well, actually I'll go through the placement of this. Well, let's go through their agreement here first. Their initial proposal was $1,000 a month rent, 2% increase, and let's just call it the smaller lease area for a single carrier. That was their initial offer. The board came back with $1,500 a month rent, 3% increase for that same small lease area, single carrier. Verizon counteroffered with $1,500 a month, but only a 2% increase, but they enlarged their lease area to the larger lease area so they could add more carriers. The final, we let that sit for a while. They came back to us. I think we've kind of settled on terms. $1,500 a month rent with a 2% annual increase with the small lease area for a single carrier. So I think we all agreed on that. And the big question then was, can we find an alternate site from the northeast corner of the Coliseum lobby area? And after meeting with Verizon representatives, our staff, our operations staff, our Coliseum staff, we identified a location on the very northwest corner of the facility back by the alley. And some of their 3D renderings, while they're not showing that exact location, it does show what the cell tower would look in reference to the ball field lights. And if you look at the one photoism, they call it. Let's see which one it is. Let's see.
This is probably the picture that we can see where you have a view of the north side of both the Coliseum and the H.A. Thompson.
Yeah, the one, looking from 10th Street going north towards the southwest, to the southeast, you can see H.A. Thompson, the Coliseum in the background, looking down the alley where there's a single car.
Yep.
And you can see where the cell tower is. Now that is located on the northeast corner, but basically that's going to be your same, view, because it'd be set right there by the chilling coils for the refrigeration system. So, but you can see right there, it blends in very well. I think the next Carolyn for us. Blends in very well with the ball field lights. It's covered, the lower portion is covered up by 35, 40 feet of the building, and then it'd be 125-foot pole. So I think hopefully this is a good location for everybody. It meets our staff and Coliseum requirements. It meets Verizon's requirements for utilities. And then I think we came to terms on the terms, so.
I can't give enough high fives on preserving that grass area, that sole grass area, and reworking how this is laid out, because I think this is a big win with getting it over into a spot of unusable space as opposed to that one small grass area that kids are always using when there's ball games up there. So I think this is a big win.
Can you scroll down one more, Carolyn?
Oh, I did.
Or did it? No.
It's on here, but it's not there yet.
Oh, it's just catching up.
I think when you look at the pictures from probably from the north football field, you can kind of see how the tower just kind of blends in with the lights, which is exactly what you had mentioned earlier, Dave. Kind of like that. Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's even going to really notice it there other than somebody who might park on that north side in the winter, but I think it's going to fit nicely there. So where it'll be on this picture where you can see the goalposts in the background, won't it be right behind the uprights?
Let's see.
Might be an angle issue.
Basically where the left upright would be. Right on that northwest corner.
Yeah, that works too. Any of those pictures work.
So do they plan on starting construction as soon as they can?
Yeah, they, pending the outcome of, the approval tonight, they want to go in there and start doing some survey work tomorrow. We just have to sign off on it, or, right of access.
Any other comments or motion?
I move we accept the Verizon agreement with the placement of the cell phone tower on the northwest corner of the Coliseum.
We have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Just a comment that I think the process worked well here where, yes, it took some time. We negotiated, got closer to market rents than what we wanted, and also finally got it in the location that makes sense for us too. So I think this one worked out well for us.
I'd agree. All right, Braden, poll the board, please.
Commissioner Dawson,
Aye.
Commissioner Popchak,
Aye.
Commissioner Deutsch,
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Rosted,
Yes, motion passes. That's the last item on the agenda. It is 7 o'clock, and do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
All right. Stay well, everyone. Thanks for the meeting. Talk to you all soon.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.